Let's say you're on the ground floor and you want to go to the fifth floor. One way or another, you're going to have to go through the second, the third, and the fourth. Whether you take the stairs, the elevator, the escalator, or go outside the building and use a rope ladder. It's natural phenomena. These scales exist the way the Pythagorean theorem exists, the way Newton's three laws of motion exist. They are just embedded in nature. And that makes it easy for them to use because when people look at this, they get it because it's natural. The most famous example of this is Saul of Tarsus on the road to Damascus. He was a Roman citizen, although he was a Jew, he was a Roman citizen, and his job was to oppress the Christians. So he's on the road, he sees some light or something in the sky, and a voice says, "Saul, why do you oppress me?" He falls off his horse, and he becomes St. Paul. So he went from being a leader, which is level 2, whose purpose is conquest, up to a saint, which is level 1, whose purpose is transcendence. Take something big like that, or to go the other way, it has an organic feel to it, because it's the way nature has made us.
Welcome, everyone, to Soul Communication Podcast. I am excited today to continue the conversation on the human consciousness, but more so on the human potential. How far can we take it in terms of our abilities? And maybe there is more to being a human. I have an exciting guest, Jim Marshall. He is a polymathic intellectual and human development engineer. Talk about new topic that you might have never heard about. It's called Septemics. Welcome, Jim.
Thanks, Diana.
Jim, there's so much we can discuss today, and I'm really curious to hear more about Septemics and what it is all about. But before we jump into that, what excites you today? I know you wrote the book many years ago. You've been on many podcasts talking about this topic. What drives you? What excites you?
There are several answers to that, and I'll give you all of them. I have no memory whatsoever of a time when I was not intensely interested in learning everything taught in every university. Now, of course, that's impossible, but the drive is there. So I was highly motivated to learn. I can still remember the exact moment when I first discovered that some children didn't like school. I was shocked because I loved school. And I went to school for 28 years, and I was a very good student. Also, what I can tell you about soul communication is the upper limit of the human band is an angel. You can morph into an angelic state. And that has been happening slowly to me throughout my life.
I love that you say that because I believe that too. I feel we are at our core blueprint are all angels, and we just forgot that we are.
Right. So you have to get into the actual engineering details of what is making us not be who we truly are, and that is what I mastered. That is what I did as a human development engineer. I helped hundreds of people to on that path. As far as my own path, I've been meditating over 40 years. The whole angelic realm is very real to me, and I look forward to going into the afterlife. I'm an angel.
Beautiful.
You may recall that James Madison famously said, "If men were angels, no government would be necessary, but men are not angels." So the work that I did gradiently moves people toward an angelic state, little by little. On myself, I've gotten quite a distance. At the angelic realm, all communication is telepathic and instantaneous. Because you see, in the afterlife, there is no time. There's no matter, energy, space, or time. And so everything is now. So it's instant telepathic communication. So learning is a very different thing. In other words, you just get it. Bing, just like that.
Yeah, I always say there's the intellect and there is the wisdom. And what I think you're referring to is the wisdom part, the frequency of knowing. Because if we are these beautiful, I would say, fragments of the source or Godhead,
Yes,
all the information is already available to us
that's right.
because we are that. We are fragments of it. And all we're doing is recollecting those pieces of ourselves to remember that we are gods and goddesses and we have all the wisdom and all the knowing. Since you are a polymath and you've learned so many different fields from psychology to arts to everything else, where does intellect work with the wisdom? How did that help you in discovering more of your modality? Maybe tell us the journey of discovery.
The journey to Septemics for me began at the age of 16 when I was accepted into engineering school. Now, of course, I thought at the time that I was going to be engineering physical things like airfoils and motors and electrons. But by the time I had my bachelor's degree, it was clear that I wanted to engineer the human psyche because it is the area of greatest unknown, of greatest mystery, and more importantly, it is the area in which we as a race are failing miserably. 95% of the problems in industrialized society are because people don't understand people, don't understand the wife, don't understand the boss, don't understand the partner, and so forth. And this book, Septemics, solves that completely across 35X. So, to make a long story short, I had a long career as a human development engineer, working one-on-one with hundreds of clients for cumulatively many thousands of hours. All of my clients improved, and this was not counseling, it was engineering.
So maybe for those who are listening, they probably, just as I am, questioning what is a human development engineer? Because we know psychologists, we know counselors, we know coaches. What's the difference?
It's none of the things you mentioned.
Mhm.
If you understand engineering, there are categories of engineers. I understand humans the way aeronautical engineers understand airplanes, the way automotive engineers understand automobiles, the way chemical engineers understand chemicals. They know it upside down, inside out, and backwards. They know exactly what they're doing, all the factors, which is why they can construct things that work, which is what Septemics is. Septemics is a philosophical science based on the fact that many phenomena related to humans occur in a sequence of 7 levels. This is naturally occurring, and I stumbled across it in the course of my work. So let me tell you how that occurred.
Mhm.
I had this long career where I worked with people, and they all improved. And at some point, I started to notice that I could predict the outcome of the session. I never told that to anyone, but I made notes. And as the decades rolled by, it became obvious to me that the client would be at a specific level on a specific scale that I had previously observed and recorded. And as a result of our interaction, he would go to the next level up. Now, this happened thousands and thousands of times. And every time it did, it verified my hypothesis because the client didn't know anything about any of this. So I was just writing it all down. So by 1995, I had about 32 scales of varying lengths that I had simply observed and recorded. Now you have to realize I would observe this first in the session, but then I would go out in the real world and see exactly the same thing manifest in people
So you
who
mean
didn't.
like patterns of behavior? Okay. We all mathematical, right? There's patterns that we repeat in based on our ancestral connections or how we were conditioned as, as children. Are those all precursors to why these patterns occur?
The scales themselves are naturally occurring.
Mhm.
And I'll tell you how I figured that out. So I had this long career as human development engineer. And in 95, a couple of things happened. One is by then I had about 32 scales that I knew were correct because I had been watching them work for decades. One in particular I had was a 6-level scale that I absolutely knew was correct. One day I was pondering a difficult client at length, and I realized that this client was at a level on that scale that I had not previously observed. In other words, it was actually a 7-level scale. Now, as soon as I saw what the level was, I knew immediately where to insert it. And as soon as I inserted it, the scale manifested mathematically. Let me tell you what I mean by that. The whole point of math is you start with an equation or a function, and you coax data out of it. That is how Einstein found E equals mc squared. Everybody in the math and physics community knows how he did it. It's no mystery. Now, when you see data jump out like that, is a mathematical manifestation. Having taken 26 semesters of math and loved every minute of it, I saw this for what it was. I said, whoa, this is mathematical. So I now had a 7-level scale. And at that moment, it went from being a scale, which is a line, to a plane, which is a whole body of data. So there are all these data that interlocked mathematically in a very complicated way. And I said, whoa, whatever this is, it's natural law because it has mathematics embedded in it. For example, the Fibonacci sequence. Then I thought, I wonder how many of these other scales are actually 7-level scales, but had not been developed all the way because I wasn't developing anything. I was just helping my clients and making notes. So knowing what I was looking for, I studied all the other scales, and in a short period of time, each went to 7 levels, and as it did, it manifested mathematically. In a couple of months, I had 32 7-level scales, all of which were based on direct empirical observation, and all had mathematics embedded in them. Now, having gone to school for 28 years, I have to say, I never saw anything like this before. So I thought, wow, looks like I discovered a new subject. My next thought was, I could go from helping people by the hundreds, which is what I had been doing as you would develop engineer, to helping people by the millions if I put this in a book and get it out so people can have it and use it. So I'm going to have to write a book. So the first draft was completed in December of 95, and I sent it out in a transcript form to colleagues of mine, all of whom had graduate degrees in a variety of subjects. And they all loved it. They had different responses, but the responses were distinctly positive. And that told me this is exactly what I think it is, a new subject that could really help people. People get this. It's not obscure.
Give us an example of a client coming over and maybe example of the scales that you're referring to so everyone can grasp when you say mathematics and what that means.
Okay. First of all, let me say, the book itself has the absolute minimum of mathematics in it. I went out of my way to make it non-mathematical.
Which is great because people will get overwhelmed, of course.
The way you experience this book is like putting on glasses and looking at yourself in the mirror or looking at somebody else with glasses on. Things clearly, like the guy, he meets a girl in the bar, it's dimly lit, and then he meets her for lunch the next day and he thinks, she didn't look this good in the bar. She looked not so good today. So he didn't have a clear picture. This is the problem that people have. Let me give you an example why this works. Let's say you invited me to your home to look at your garden. You said, Jim, come over and look at my garden. I said, okay, so I come over and you show me your garden. I say, oh, Diana has peonies, chrysanthemums, tulips, hydrangeas, irises. See, these are all very different. Now, the reason I can do that is I've been involved with gardening since I was a boy. I know all kinds of things about flowers. Now, if you were to bring some 5-year-old kid into your garden, he would see and smell the same things that I did. But all he can say is, these are pretty and they smell nice. That's all he knows. Now, most people, adults, are like that little kid as regards people. They don't know what they're looking at. This is why more than 50% of Americans are not married, and of the ones who are married, more than 50% of them get divorced. They obviously didn't understand what they were looking at.
They were never taught in school. We were never taught human psychology and how to relate to each other or to relate to themselves. I would love for these children right now to have meditation classes like they do in some countries in Asia. But you're right, there's nothing that teaches that.
There is now, and it's called Septemics. Now, so let me give you an example. So let's say you have a couple. They've been dating for 2 years and they're talking about getting married. Wouldn't it be smart to ask the question, why does this person want to marry me? Isn't that a reasonable question? I'm not saying to ask the partner. I'm saying to get the book out and look at the scale of motivation. There are only 7 basic human motivations. And although people can come up with thousands, they're just subsets of these. The guy knows this woman. He's been with her for 2 years. He sees the scale. He reads about it. And it's not hard for him to spot her on that scale. So let's say he decides after reading this that she wants to marry him because she loves him. That's level 1, the highest motivation of all. But maybe that doesn't happen. Maybe he says, well, I thought about this. Maybe she wants to marry me because I drive a Maserati, I fly my own Learjet, I have a 55-foot yacht, live in a $15 million condo, and I have $10 million in the bank. See, that's a different motivation. That's level 4, money. I'm not saying good or bad. I'm just saying that's what it is. Now, this can go a couple of ways. He could look at it and say, she wants to marry me for my money, but she's a great girl and I love her and I don't care. I'll marry her. So they get married and he's happy. But it might not go that way. He might look at it and say, wait a minute, this woman is a gold digger. I don't want to marry a gold digger. I want to marry somebody who loves me for myself. And he breaks off with her. Now, you might think in that second case, he's going to be upset about this. And he would be wrong. He would be relieved. He would say, thank you, Diana, for showing me this, because I dodged a bullet. I got out of this before I wound up owing this woman $15,000 a month in alimony. So, you see, this is very specific. Now, did you ever notice how many ugly, older, outer-shaped men marry beautiful young women? I see these couples, I say, how can this be? This guy's 50 pounds overweight, he's gray, he looks like he never worked out in his life, and he's married to this girl who looks like a beauty queen. Let me tell you how it works. The beauty queen gets a diamond ring, a pearl necklace, a Corvette, a credit card, and a mink coat. The 55-year-old out-of-shape guy gets a 23-year-old beauty queen for a wife. So they're both happy. So she comes to him and says, honey, I'd like to go to Vegas for the weekend. He says, okay, here's $5,000, have a good time. So when she comes back on Monday, she's happy and she's grateful. See, it works for them. So I'm not judging any of this. I'm just saying it's seeing the truth.
Well, you're describing as different human motivations for existence, but I also believe there's more than just these, I would call them 3D level motivations, where it's more on a survival level versus the human potential. We did start with the fact that we're angels, right? You can be on a survival level and just be on more materialistic plane, or perhaps on more spiritual plane. And then those motivations are very different because you are becoming more conscious being and you're understanding there is more to life than having those materialistic possessions.
If a person were highly evolved, he would be at level 1. His motivation would be love. So we're talking about Jesus of Nazareth, right? It was all about love. Love thy neighbor. So he was at that level. Now, this is called hierarchies of human phenomena. It's not hierarchies of angelic phenomena.
So is love the highest potential for a being?
It's the highest motivation for a human.
For a human. What about angels then?
This is not hierarchies of angelic phenomena.
But wouldn't you say love is the underlying force of creation? Wouldn't that be the ultimate reality game that we're playing here? Or are we different than other beings and their motivations? Because they're also interested in consciousness and development of consciousness. Maybe not angels per se, but other extraterrestrial beings.
I was careful to limit this to human phenomena. So whether this applies to people from other planets, I'm not asserting it does or it doesn't.
Mm-hmm.
There are many people who have said that there are ETs that are essentially human. They look exactly like us and they behave like us. So maybe it does apply to them, but I'm not asserting that. I'm saying, as a human development engineer, I saw these phenomena in hundreds and hundreds of different humans, and even outside the session, it's impossible for me to look at anybody and not see these phenomena in play. For example, there's a scale of literacy. I'm standing in the bank waiting, and there's two people behind me talking. I can tell by the way these people talk where each of them is on the scale of literacy, just from how they speak.
And when you say scale of literacy, can you just give us a little more explanation of what that means?
Well, most people think you're literate or you're illiterate.
Mm-hmm.
There are actually 7 levels of literacy. And most people are below what I would call literate. Literate would be somebody like Jordan Peterson. He's literate. Most people are not at that level. They're at levels 5, 6, and 7. So you have to realize there are 35 different scales here. Let me read to you the names of the 35 scales so you know exactly what subject matter is being
Yeah,
covered.
I think that would be helpful to understand some of these. Mm-hmm.
24 of these scales are what I call individual scales, meaning they apply primarily to an individual, and 11 apply primarily to a group. These are the individual scales: the scale of basic purposes, the scale of personal influence, the scale of choice, the scale of permeation, the scale of thought, the scale of identity, the scale of evaluation, the scale of motivation, the scale of control, the scale of stopping, the scale of scholarship, the scale of literacy, the scale of human ability, the scale of memory, the scale of spiritual identity, the scale of mental deletion, the scale of aberration, the scale of physical fitness, the scale of justification, the scale of belief, the scale of equanimity, the scale of attack, the scale of conflict, and the scale of reaction. And these are the group scales: the scale of relationships, the scale of life spheres, the scale of government, the scale of civilization, the scale of survival, the scale of management, the scale of exchange, the scale of communication, the scale of allegiance, the scale of sexuality, and the scale of politics. Any one of these scales by itself could dramatically improve the life of the reader. And I'll give you an example. I talked about the scale of motivation.
Yeah.
You could take this scale and you could ask, what is my wife's motivation toward me? What is my husband's motivation toward me? What is my son's motivation toward me? What is my next door neighbor's motivation toward me? And you could do this on everyone you know and everyone you have ever known. So you could do this one exercise 300, 400, 500 different ways. Now, every time you correctly find it, you will have an epiphany. You'll say, oh, now I understand what was going on with George. He had this motivation. See, so you're a little smarter, and then you carry that into the next one. Now, you could reverse the vector and say, what is my motivation toward Fred? What is my motivation toward Joe? What is my motivation toward Andy? See, and use it that way again, another 3 or 4 or 500 different times. Now, by the time you finish with this, you'll be a greatly clarified person because you'll know the motivation of all the people around you.
But that's also assuming that this motivation is a judgment call on whether you think the person is on the scales. We can't fully know if that's exact the motivation because it's our subjective type of perspective.
Let me correct you. It's true you can make a mistake, but the mistake is easily caught, and I'll tell you why.
Mhm.
Every time you correctly find a level, whether it's your own or another's, you have a realization. See? So you're reading some scale, and you get down to level 5 and say, wait a minute, this is my mother-in-law. This is exactly how she is. But look, I don't know this guy's mother-in-law. How did I describe her exactly so that he could spot her in the text? It's because it's natural law. So this is not a judgment. It's just like every tulip in the universe is unique. Every rose in the universe is unique, but I can always tell the difference between a rose and a tulip, and so can almost everyone else. People tell you their levels. It comes right out of their mouths. So if you just shut up and listen, the person will tell you where he is on the scale. So this is not hard to do.
Let's maybe zoom into the spiritual development scale. I'm interested in that one. So what are the 7 sub-levels in there?
But do you mean the scale of spiritual identity?
Was it spiritual identity? Yeah.
The scale of spiritual identity.
Identity.
Well, I would have to open up to the scale, and I don't mind doing that. But I have to tell you, every scale is unique. You cannot infer anything about a scale A from studying scale B. And that is why it spans the spectrum of human experience. In other words, any problem, difficulty, situation, dilemma that any person has that has anything to do with people can successfully be analyzed by one or more of these scales because they are unique. See, if they were similar to one another, they wouldn't span the spectrum of human experience. But let me open to the scale of spiritual.
Yeah, let's look at that.
Next shared issue. I don't usually discuss specific scales on these interviews, but I'll be happy to do that. Now, again, without looking at the scale, this is going to be hard to understand because you have to actually look at the scale. When you look at it, you get it. It's like the periodic table of elements. You look at it and say, oh, this makes sense. Level 0 is that a person identifies as an inanimate object. There are people who think they are things. If you look at devic entities, there are beings who think they're rocks, who think they're a grain of sand. There are beings who think they are a molecule or an atom. Up from that is an animate object, which is an animal. A dog or a cat, he thinks it's an animal. That's what he thinks, I'm an animal. Up from that, 6 is a persona. A persona is an identity. This is what most people think of themselves. Who are you? I'm Joe Smith. Or you might say, I'm a Christian. See, that's an identity. And up from that is the spirit. This is the person who understands that he is a spirit. See, that is a higher level of consciousness. And above that is an angel. An angel is a free being. He's beyond really merely realizing he's a spirit, because there's many religious people or spiritual people who realize they're spirits, but an angel is beyond that. And above that is a god. So this would be a divine being who, like Zeus or Venus or Thor, who has these tremendous powers. They're not infinite powers, but they are far beyond anything that an angel would have. And the top is you identify as infinity. I am all things. And that's what God is. So that's the scale of spiritual identity. Now, to really understand it, you need to look at the scale and read the chapter, because I explain in detail why it's that way and how it fits together. But let me tell you how this is beneficial to people in a general way.
Right. Like how would you use that knowing, for instance, there's this scale we just talked about. How can they apply to themselves?
Without talking about that specific scale, about
Scales, yeah.
all the scales, what I can tell you is this. Each of these 35 scales provides the user with an infallible way of determining the salutariness or beneficialness of any group, individual, or activity. If the group, individual, or activity moves persons up these scales, it's beneficial or positive. If it moves them down, it's detrimental or negative. So I'm giving you a yardstick by which to measure human affairs, which is an entirely new thing. More importantly, finding out what level, just finding out what level you or another person is at on any scale is by itself inherently beneficial and enlightening. So you spot yourself, let's say, on the scale of spiritual identity, and you have this big epiphany. Oh, I see. See, you have a realization. That is how you know you found the right level. If you just say, I'm at this level and nothing happens, you found the wrong level. Because this is an important epiphany that happens even want other people. So you look at your girlfriend, you say, oh, she's a level 5 on the scale of choice. That explains why she does this and this. See, you understand her better now. So you can communicate better with her now.
Does it mean that her particular, let's say, level of choice might change because she's evolving?
Sure. That's the next thing I was going to say.
Yeah, it's not static, it's evolving.
Right. Once you know the correct level on any scale, you can improve that person by moving them up to the next level up. So this is monumentally important because I have solved the gradient problem that has bedeviled mankind for 6,000 years. Now, let me tell you what I mean by that. Most people have problems, dilemmas, and difficulties, and they can't resolve them. 99% of the time is because they don't know the gradient. All good coaches, therapists, facilitators understand you must do human potential on a gradient. You cannot make a couch potato into an Olympic athlete. There are too many intervening levels. You can make him into a normal person. See? That might be the next level up. Each of these scales is the gradients. I'm giving you the gradients. I'm telling you, for any one of these 35 subjects, if you want to progress, you find out what level you're at, and you target yourself for the next level up. So let's say you find you're at level 4, and you target yourself to go to level 3. You ignore the rest of it. You target yourself to go to level. You will get there because it's
You
the
go
next.
down, not up in the
1 is the
progression.
highest level, and 7 is the lowest.
Okay.
If you're at level 4 and you try to get to level 1 or 2, you will fail because it's too steep a gradient.
I always think the other way. It's like we go up the stairs, but I think for you, it's like down the stairs. You're in the scale.
We're moving on the
It's
scale.
one at a time, because otherwise we fumble, or the other way around. You can't really go up until you pass all the levels, right?
One of the axioms of this subject is that you can only move to an adjacent level. What's beneficial?
Yeah.
Because it tells you how to succeed. If you find you're at level 3, you target yourself for level 2. And if you really try, you will get there because it's the next thing. Think of it this way. Let's say you're on the ground floor and you want to go to the fifth floor. One way or another, you're going to have to go through the second, the third, and the fourth. Whether you take the stairs, the elevator, the escalator, or go outside the building and use a rope ladder. Okay? It's natural phenomena. These scales exist the way the Pythagorean theorem exists, the way Newton's 3 laws of motion exist. They are just embedded in nature. And that makes it easy for them to use because when people look at this, they get it because it's natural. So it has an organic feel to it because it's the way nature has made us.
That makes sense. I use a lot of different frameworks, Jim. So this helps me a lot because I like the frameworks because they give us a sense of foundation, like a starter point, whether it's astrology or human design or gene keys. There's different astrological frameworks, I Ching systems. I'm actually writing a book about ascension levels. And so I really get your concept of scales and levels because I think it's just helpful for us to know where we are and where we go and how we progress. But I have a question for you where I'm seeing, I would say, like a challenge in the human progression is what I call anchoring. So, for instance, I see a person moving to the next adjacent, let's say, scale or trying to move there, but then they can't fully integrate and embody that particular pattern, and they tend to fall back to their old ways. And so often I'm seeing this teeter-tottering happening where they there and I'm like, yes, you're almost there, but then they tend to fall back. From your experience and working with so many people, why the challenge happens, how can we help them to really fully embody and step into that next scale?
It's all about gradient. For example, guy came to me with a drinking problem. Great guy, but he had a drinking problem, right? So we worked on this. And it was little increments, and at some point he says, I don't need this alcohol. See, and he's there. But he didn't get there all at once. So we might have to run 10 different processes to get him there, or 20 different processes. The engineering part of this is very precise and specific and uses biofeedback. So I don't want to get into that. But the idea is that it's gradients. Now, these scales are the gradients. Now, if you correctly find a person on a scale, he will have a realization. He will say, oh, now I see why I can't get along with my husband. It's Bobby Bob. This explains it. See? If that happens, he will be able to get up to the next level. Now, how long it takes, what he has to do to get there, how much work is involved, those are wild variables.
They moved to the next scale and next gradient, but couldn't, for whatever reason, hold it and just ended up going back to your example of drinking. Maybe that guy did all the work, but then something happened.
Upscale and downscale.
And downscale, and he went back to the bar. And because
Probably
that's
didn't
his
eat.
known place. That's where he feels comfortable.
So let's say you find this guy, right? He makes $250,000 a year. He lives in a gorgeous house. He has a beautiful wife and a lovely little girl. So the wife goes out for a drive with the little girl, and they're both killed in a car accident. The guy is crushed, right? He can't deal with it, so he starts drinking and taking drugs. Because of the drugs and the alcohol, he loses his job, probably appropriately so. Because he loses his job, he can't make the house payments. He loses his house. All that equity is gone. See? Now this guy, he has no job. He has no place to live. He winds up a homeless person out on the street begging for pennies. What happened to that guy? He fell down several scales. Not one scale, several scales. And you could reconstruct this and say he was at this level, and then he went down here. And then on this scale, he was at this level, and he went down here. For example, let's say you take the scale of basic purposes. There are only 7 basic purposes, okay? It's not easy to change on that scale. That is a scale that it is the hardest to change on. Most people live a whole lifetime at one level of that scale. It is a persistent trait. There are other scales where people change by the minute.
All of a basic trait.
Yes. Let's say the most famous example of this is Saul of Tarsus on the road to Damascus, right? He was a Roman citizen, although he was a Jew, he was a Roman citizen, and his job was to oppress the Christians. Okay? So he's on the road, he sees some light or something in the sky, and a voice says, Saul, why do you oppress me? He falls off his horse, right? And he becomes St. Paul. So he went from being a leader, which is level 2, whose purpose is conquest, up to a saint, which is level 1, whose purpose is transcendence. Take something big like that, or to go the other way.
Or near-death experience, and many have that, or divorce. If you really look at why people wake up, there is usually like a handful of things that happen to people. They get sick, some terminal disease, or somehow the body is kicking them. Car accident, or some really accidental type of situation that opens the field of perception. Or the reality, as they know, breaks up, and usually it's relationship oriented, whether it's divorce or something with a child, whatever that happens. Those are kickers that really shift them into conscious awareness. And I think that's when the scale really shift.
Sometimes it goes up, sometimes it goes down. Depends on the person.
Exactly.
So you could have somebody who is sent to a Nazi concentration camp. He survives. When he comes out of the camp, he's not going to be the same person, because that experience is so horrific and oppressive. He will probably go down a level on the scale of basic purposes. So if he was a level 4, he'll probably now be a level 5. See? It's a big change.
Or the other way around, because we've seen some incredible, miraculous stories as well. Could be where they all of a sudden become like saints. These people that actually heroes of that persevered through the hardship and became incredible.
Yeah. Sometimes it moves the person up the scale, sometimes it moves them down. It depends on the person, depends on the situation. Every person is unique, and every situation is unique. But what is not unique is the scales. The scales are exact.
Mhm.
They are like the Pythagorean theorem. It's always correct.
Jim, what do you think makes them go either up and down? Do you think if they had more tools to know how to handle their emotions and let's say if they were doing meditations every day, that would help them in managing the situation so they would not fall up, well, go down the scale?
There are all kinds of things that help people improve,
Mhm.
hundreds of them. Could be Buddhism, could be Christianity, could be the Boy Scouts, could be studying physics. There's all kinds of things that cause people to move up. And similarly, there's all kinds of things that cause people to go down these scales. Drugs, violence, terrorism. It's all, but what we know is that every person is at some level on every scale.
Yeah.
Now, that is valuable because the data about yourself or your husband or your son is just sitting there waiting for you to access it. Now, of course, you can ignore it. That's what people have been doing for 6,000 years. But it's much smarter to simply use it, right? So let's say you have trouble with your mother-in-law, right? Common problem, right? So you get out the book and you start asking yourself, where is she on the scale? Where, see? And when you spot her on a certain scale, yeah, this is the level. See, you have that explains why she, every time I do this, she does that.
How would you then change your behavior? Let's say you found that this out that she's operating a certain scale. So how would you behavior change? Is it just being more conscious in
Yes, when you know what you're
modifying?
dealing with, you
Mhm,
know how to do it.
mhm,
So, for example, let's go back to the garden, right?
right.
If you say, I want to go out and pick some tulips. Okay, so you take your scissors, but if you go out and see I'm picking roses, say, wait a minute, do you have any gloves? Because tulips have thorns, you should wear gloves when you pick them, or you're going to get cut up. See, that's because I know the nature of a rose and the nature of a tulip. So when you know someone's nature, it helps you. So, for example, I have a friend, wonderful person. He's what I would describe as a political extremist. So, this guy has many wonderful traits, okay? We have a lot of fun together. When he gets into politics, I don't mess with it. I just tiptoe around it. I just nod, okay, that's fine. What do you say we turn on the baseball game? See, and I want to lose. Because I know there's that minefield and I'm not going to get into it with him. Now, look, I have three sisters. Two of them are conservatives, and one of them is a liberal. I get along great with all of them, okay? I just don't make it an issue. I tiptoe around it. So, there are very few people, fewer than 1%, who are at or near the top of all the scales. There's a larger number that are at or near the bottom of all the scales, maybe 4%.
Based on what you just said, that tells us a lot about the consciousness of humanity.
Yeah. Also, realize most of us are high in some scales and low in other scales, right?
Mhm.
Here's a guy, he makes $300,000 a year, and he's CEO of some big corporation, but he can't get girls to like him. It might be that on the scale of human ability, he's very high. He knows his job. He knows how to run this corporation. But on the scale of sexuality, he's near the bottom. Now, here's what you have to understand. One of the axioms of this subject is when a person is at or near the top of the scale, it's because he's insightful in that area. When a person is at or near the bottom of the scale, is because he lacks insight in that area. So when you try to talk to this guy about women, he's dopey. He doesn't know what to do. You talk to him about his business, he's like a genius. See? So he's high on one scale and low on another. That's not unusual. It's just, it varies because there are 35 scales and everyone has a different profile. So what you could do is you could take somebody who's in your life, say your spouse or your boyfriend, and you could analyze this person across all 35 scales. Find where that person is on every scale. By the time you finish that, you will understand that person better than he understands himself. This is good. You know what you're dealing with. This guy is not a tulip. He's not a rose. He's a chrysanthemum. See? You deal with it that way. Now, chrysanthemums look very nice, but they don't have much of a scent. Do you ever notice that? Roses have a wonderful scent. So if you want the room to smell nice, you bring roses in with it, right? And the aroma goes to it. If you bring chrysanthemums in, that doesn't happen. They look nice. So again, knowing that about those flowers, if you understand people that way, you get the same thing. So look, I meet people online and also in 3 dimensions all the time because of this book and my profession. I know lots of people. I'm always meeting people. And I use this material continuously. It's impossible for me not to use it. It's just if I'm walking down the street and I go by somebody's house and he's got a rose going, I say, oh, he's got roses. I go to the next guy, say, oh, this guy's got tulips. It's easy.
Jim, so this helps you to understand what the person is, right? So then you develop more compassion, like you were saying, tiptoeing.
Mm-hmm.
So that helps us to be more patient and compassionate toward what's happening because of knowing that this person is a certain way. And we're not always trying to fix everyone because I think that's an important thing because sometimes people think just because they know the scale, they're like, oh, we have to change this person to fix them and level them up. But that's not necessarily always the idea here, right?
Right.
Recognition of the different types of people and where they are and their consciousness and their understanding and their pattern recognition.
You got to utilize them. So, for
Exactly.
example, I know the basic purpose of every president of the United States, going back as far as Franklin Delano Roosevelt, and many of the presidents prior to him who I studied, such as Washington and Lincoln and Jefferson. Okay? There are thousands of books about those guys. And if you read them, it's not hard to spot them. For example, on the scale of basic purposes, George Washington is at level 3. Okay?
Which is what?
Which is the
winner. Interesting. What about
winner.
Trump? What do you think of him?
I never give the level of any living person.
Okay.
It's unethical and counterproductive.
I'm actually going to be on the cruise with his granddaughter, Eisenhower. I was reading about his encounters with some alien beings back in 1954. So I was looking into that today, actually.
He was
Curious.
at level 4,
Level 4, which is?
which is the normal.
What
It's
is the
the
normal?
largest group.
What is the
The
normal?
The normal, it's the normal. That's the name of the level. The normal's goal is conformity. Now, you might say, that's not a good thing. Oh, really? Think of it this way. This person wants to fit in. He doesn't want to rock the boat. Okay? He doesn't want to overturn the apple cart. So look, if people grow mustaches, he grows a mustache. When mustaches go out, he shaves them off, right? If people get sideburns, he grows sideburns. When the sideburns go out, he shaves off the sideburns. Okay? That's somebody at level 4, right? And everybody has a station wagon. He wants to get a station wagon. It's conformity. So, for example, if you watch reruns of Ozzie and Harriet, that whole show was about conformity. Everybody in that show was at level 4. They were like normal Americans. They all had a regular house, regular kids, and went to regular school, and they drove regular American cars, and they belonged to the Elks or the Women's Club. That whole show is about that. Okay? It's very clear. Whereas Alexander Hamilton was at level 2, which is the leader. He was very different from Jefferson. Now, most Americans know that Jefferson and Hamilton were opponents. They did not get along. It wasn't so much that Hamilton disliked Jefferson, but Jefferson despised Hamilton. Hamilton was a leader. His goal was to conquer. And if you study him, you can see that. Jefferson was a winner, like Washington. He was interested in feathering his nest. He didn't face the redcoats. When the redcoats got far enough inland to get to his home, he got on a horse and got out of there. Hamilton wanted to fight from the beginning. He left what we now call Columbia University as, I think it was like 21, to join the militia to fight the redcoats. Okay? And by the time he was 22, he was a colonel because he was so brilliant. And Washington could see this. Hamilton kept going to Washington and say, give me a command, I want to fight. Washington said, no, I need you right here next to me. And Washington kept Hamilton at his elbow right through the war. And then, after Washington became president, he made Hamilton Secretary of the Treasury. Most people don't know that what we call the United States federal government was created more by Hamilton than any other single person, because they were starting from nothing. It was his genius and brilliance. He made the United States economically viable right from the beginning. That was his idea, what they call the Ascension plan. Okay? And he got it through Congress, and voila, America was trading with all these other countries and getting rich. Right from the beginning. That was his doing, okay? So people who are at these different levels conflict with one another. See, after I understood that Hamilton was a 2 and Jefferson was a 3, then I understood why they didn't get along. This was so bad that Jefferson resigned as Secretary of State because he couldn't stand being in the same cabinet with Hamilton. Okay, this is what happens when you have people at these conflicting levels.
Wrapping it into the soul communication, as you're talking about leaders versus winners, ego is part of it. I feel a leader is someone who's very driven and the ego is strong, then maybe how strong is the ego in what they're trying to control and achieve?
I do not even mention the ego anywhere in the book. Ego is a construct created by Freud, and it's something that exists in psychology. Septemics is not psychology. It is a much larger subject. Well, here's what you have to understand. Let's take astrology, for example, okay? There's a lot of validity to astrology, but all you get from astrology is a tendency, okay? This person tends to be this, but the person can overcome that.
Right.
For example, I was born in the year of the tiger. Tigers are known for being reckless. Anybody who knows me will say, he is not reckless, okay? But it took me many years to overcome that. Even though it's in my horoscope, I defeated it. I'm not reckless at all. I'm extremely careful. That's different from Septemics, where you are at a level. Now, as I said, you could ignore it. And you may not even be able to figure it out, especially if you're at a lower level, you might. Because the lower you are on a scale, the harder it is for you to use that scale. But you could use another scale where you're a little higher, and then you get a little smarter, and then you come back to it, you may be able to get it. But this is very user-friendly. I designed these scales to wrap around the reader. And all of these things we're talking about enable your communication. Your communication with people improves. Your spiritual capacity improves. Generally, across, as you go up all of these, your soul communication is improving, little by little. And the closer you get to the top of the scale, the more you realize that you are a soul and that your communication is virtually unlimited, capable of knowing anything, past, future, or present. You're capable of seeing through space and time. It's just a matter of gradients. When you move yourself up these scales, all of those abilities naturally show themselves. So this is right on the subject of soul communication. It's just that I'm giving you a reliable tool, because as an engineer, you have to understand, the job of an engineer is to create something that works all the time for everyone. When you are an engineer, you cannot say, whoops, and have the plane fall out of the sky. Oops, I didn't get that right. You can't do that as an engineer. That's why it's very strict. We have margins for error in everything to make sure everything goes the way we want it to go. If we calculate a certain weight that's going to be on this bridge, that's not the number we use. We add 10% to that. That's the number we use. because then it's stronger than it needs to be, even at the optimal point. So that is the way I constructed these as an engineer. It's very precise, it's very accurate, and it applies to everyone. Now, I will tell you, there are people who are not going to like this and not going to use it. Psychopaths, sociopaths, murderers, torturers, terrorists, corrupt politicians, professional criminals, right? They're not interested in self-improvement. They're not interested in improving other people. They're interested in cleaning out your bank account and stealing your wife, right? That's what they're about. Okay, so this book is not for them. I've actually calculated that about 50% of the human race wants to improve oneself and or others. Okay? About half of us. And if those people can read English, this book is for them because it will facilitate that.
And where can they find the book? What's your website? What's the best way to get it?
My website is septemics.com, septemics, where you can find what many readers have said, what many journalists have written, what the reviews are. You can read sections of the book itself. And there's even a 15-minute pre-recorded introduction to Septemics that you can listen to that explains it to a new person in 15 minutes.
Thank you so much, Jim. This was really fascinating. And check out Jim's website, get the book, and judge for yourself how you can apply it for your life. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you for tuning in to this episode. You can visit my website, dianadivine.com, where I'm now offering a special Quantum Master Creator free ebook that will help you to create the conscious dimensional life that you want. I'm also offering other programs, one-on-one sessions such as Quantum Healer Hypnosis and Quantum Crystalline Soul Healing to help you in your vibrational alignment. On sourcelanguage.org, I'm offering a digitized course that is self-paced to open you to the divine gift of light language. I'm Diana Divine, and keep connecting with your higher self.